Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. U.S. President Donald Trump continues to threaten Iran, saying Tehran could face full destruction of bridges and power plants if a Tuesday evening deadline to reopen the Strait of Hormuz is not met. Iran has rejected a 45-day ceasefire proposal and said it wants a permanent end to the war. Instead, it responded with its own 10-point plan, while dismissing U.S. threats as baseless. Samsung Electronics earned a record-breaking operating profit in the first quarter of this year, up more than eightfold from a year earlier. It surpassed 57 trillion Korean won, or nearly $38 million for the first time, driven by strong demand for memory chips used for AI and data centers. We begin this morning with the latest on the Middle East conflict. U.S. President Donald Trump continues to threaten Iran, saying Tehran could face full destruction of bridges and power plants if a Tuesday evening deadline to reopen the Strait of Hormuz is not met. He also lashed out at allies, including South Korea, for their lack of support. Our Kim Jun-ho starts us off.
U.S. President Donald Trump on Monday issued an ultimatum to Iran, saying all power plants and bridges would be destroyed unless the Strait of Hormuz is reopened, and the deal aimed at ending the 5-week conflict is agreed. Speaking to reporters at the White House on Monday, Trump said he was not at all concerned that such action could amount to war crimes, and that he had already given Tehran enough extensions, and the Tuesday 8 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time deadline is final.
But we're giving them till tomorrow, 8 o'clock Eastern Time, and after that, they're going to have no bridges, they're going to have no power plants.
Trump went on to say that total destruction would be carried out by midnight, and that Iran must accept the deal he deems acceptable, reiterating that reopening the Strait of Hormuz remains his top priority in any agreement with Tehran. The U.S. president also criticized European and Asian allies for failing to support Washington in its conflict with Iran, specifically naming South Korea. Repeating his description of NATO as a, quote, paper tiger, he said the alliance had offered little support in the war.
And it's not just NATO. You know who else didn't help us? South Korea didn't help us. You know who else didn't help us? Australia didn't help us. You know who else didn't help us? Japan.
He wrapped up his press conference with renewed frustration over the lack of response to last month's call for naval deployments to the Strait of Hormuz. Trump pointed to what he said is 45,000 U.S. troops stationed in South Korea, though the actual figure is closer to 28,000. He stressed that their deployment was to offer protection against nuclear-armed North Korea. Kim Jun-ho, Arirang News.
Iran has rejected a 45-day temporary ceasefire proposal, calling instead for a permanent end to the conflict. Washington warns of possible strikes if no deal is reached, as Iran confirms a top IRGC commander has been killed. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
Iran has rejected a 45-day temporary ceasefire plan delivered to both Washington and Tehran by regional intermediaries, calling instead for a permanent end to the conflict. According to Iran state news agency IRNA on Monday, Tehran has instead submitted a 10-point response via Pakistan, rejecting a temporary ceasefire and outlining demands including an end to regional conflicts, safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz, reconstruction of war-damaged areas, and the lifting of international sanctions. U.S. President Donald Trump described Iran's proposal as a significant step, but said it was not good enough, warning of sweeping strikes on Iranian infrastructure if no deal is reached. Iran on Monday dismissed the threats as baseless.
The rude rhetoric, arrogance and baseless threats of the delusional U.S. president arising from the deadlock he faces and aimed at justifying the repeated defeats of the U.S. military will have no effect on the continuation of offensive and crushing operations by the fighters of Islam against U.S. and Israeli enemies.
The exchange follows reports that Washington sent a 15-point peace plan proposal through Pakistan in late March, which Iran rejected as unrealistic and disconnected from battlefield conditions. Meanwhile, tensions escalated on the ground. Iran confirmed the death of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps intelligence chief, Majid Kademi, in an overnight strike blamed on U.S. and Israeli forces. Israel later confirmed responsibility, with Defense Minister Israel Katz calling Kademi a top commander responsible for war crimes. The Israel Defense Forces said he was among the IRGC's most senior figures, underscoring a widening conflict with no clear path to de-escalation. 이승재, Arirang News.
Samsung Electronics' first quarter profit beat its total for all of last year. It saw profits of 57.2 trillion Korean won, or approximately $37.9 billion, marking its best quarter on record. According to the company's preliminary earnings report posted on Tuesday, this is a 755% surge compared to the same period last year. Sales increased 68% on year to reach 133 trillion Korean won, or roughly $88 billion. While market analysts have widely expected a strong performance driven by global demand for advanced artificial intelligence memory chips, this report exceeds earlier expectations of 40 to 50 trillion won in profit. The finalized and fully audited financial results will be disclosed later this month, following board approval. And now for a closer look at what Samsung's record operating profit suggests and the domestic economy in South Korea. We're joined today by Professor Shin Se-don, professor at the Division of Business Economics at Sookmyung Women's University.
Good morning.
Professor Shin, good morning. So Samsung Electronics is projecting a record first quarter operating profit of over 50 trillion Korean won. That's over $33 billion, right? And that's actually higher than its total profit for all of last year. What does this tell us about the company's overall performance and the outlook?
Well, it is really difficult to express how successful and how amazing Samsung's achievement for the first quarter of 2026. Operation profit is about 57 trillion won for the first quarter. And if it is extended to a yearly level, it is going to be about $150 billion. $150 billion is worth of operation profit. And that, I think, is even bigger than national current account surplus for 2025, which was about 120 billion. So just for one company like Samsung, they have been earning more dollars than entire Korea for the last year. So
right.
It is amazing. It is really amazing. And I was really surprised by that.
Right, it is an amazing number. And South Korea's national debt exceeded $863 billion, and there are growing calls for the government to restructure, mandatory and tax expenditures. Is the Korean economy on the right track?
Well, first, I did for the last 6 or 7 years since COVID-19. Korean government has been feeling that the real economy in Korea has been suffering very hard, very low economic growth, and especially the lower income, class people are having really tough times to survive. So government, either, the ruling party or opposition party had believed that the government has to do something. And that's why for the last 6 years, government expenditure has been increasing almost 60% for the last 6 years. So that's why Korean national debt has been rising so rapidly to the level of 50% of GDP. But 50% of GDP, that number is not really significant. More significant is we can't go on like that forever. We have to stop it, and we have to reduce government expenditure down the road. So government has to be really careful to efficiently use, those money in government expenditure to boost the real economy. And that I think is the real challenge for the government. And any government in the future cannot be as free as previous, government spending.
And the $1 exchange rate has been fluctuating wildly amid the conflict in the Middle East, and this pushed foreign exchange trading volume to a record high last month. How effective have response measures from government authorities been so far, and what further steps are needed?
Well, traditionally, the government and authority, and as well as Bank of Korea, has been very passive in intervening in exchange market because, if you look at the history of a Korean exchange rate, it is determined not by domestic situations, but rather by international influences. For the last couple of years, it is Japanese yen which has driven Korean won in accordance with the value of the yen. So the Korean authority, either the government or the Bank of Korea, cannot overturn the influence that has been affecting the yen rate. So I think the authority has to be very passive in changing the course of exchange rate. Government has been trying to do something, especially enticing outbound investors to retreat back to domestic, stock markets, but it has been proved has a little effect. So I think government has cannot actually intervene in international, finance market to change. We just keep hoping that, the Japanese yen die down to the lower level, in which case Korean won could go down below 1,500 or even down to 1,450. So I think everything depends upon the value of the yen.
I see. And this conflict in the Middle East and disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz are impacting not only oil and gas prices, but also fertilizer supplies, and this has raised concerns over rising food costs. How serious do you see the risk of a surge in agricultural and grocery prices?
Well, on the micro level, there'll be a series of surge in some prices like fertilizers or in some cases, the gasoline. But on the macro level, inflation rate would not pick up more than a few tenths of a 1 percentage point. So if it does not persist longer than, let's say, 2 or 3 months, I think the inflation shock will be pretty short-lived, and much, some commodities could, go up in their prices, but I don't think it's going to last more than a quarter or even longer than a month. So I expect the inflation in general will dial down very quickly in the month of May or in June.
I see. I guess we'll have to see how that plays out. All right, Professor Shin, thanks so much for taking the time today. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And President Lee Jae-myung has renewed calls for practical alternatives to strengthen South Korea's access to energy supplies, aimed at building a more resilient economic structure. Our Blue House correspondent Song Yoo-jin reports.
With the economic fallout from the Middle East conflict now a matter of how long rather than hypothetical, President Lee Jae-myung says South Korea must move quickly to overhaul its vulnerable economic structure.
취약계층의 어려움을 세심하게 살피는 노력과 함께 대외 변수와 지정학적 리스크에 취약한 우리 경제 구조를 근본부터 새롭게 개편하는 경제산업 대전환에도 속도를 내야 되겠습니다.
Presiding over a cabinet/emergency economic meeting at the Blue House on Monday, Lee urged his cabinet to, number 1, diversify energy supply routes, and number 2, reduce the country's heavy dependence on fossil fuels. The immediate concern is crude oil. Around 2/3 of South Korea's crude oil imports pass through the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran has closed to most commercial shipping. An alternative being considered is Saudi Arabia's port of Yanbu on the Red Sea coast, which has a maximum export capacity of about 5 million barrels of crude oil per day.
지금 우회 수입할 수 있는 루트가 그렇게 많지도 않고 위험성이 조금 있다고 원천 봉쇄하거나 하면 대한민국 전체 원유 공급 문제에 심각한 영향을 미쳐서 국가나 국민들에게 너무 위협이 크니까 그 균형을 잘 맞춰야 됩니다.
The government says it will resume Red Sea transits by oil tankers that meet, quote, certain conditions, with the foreign minister saying the likelihood of the route being completely blocked or directly targeted remains low. This comes after South Korea issued an advisory last month urging its vessels to avoid the route due to security concerns. On energy transition, Lee called for measures to expand renewable energy use, such as the swift introduction of more flexible solar pricing. The idea is to set lower daytime rates when supply is abundant.
지금 유럽이나 이런 데는 이미 하고 있는 거 아니에요? 에너지 섬나라니까 더 빨리 더 세게 해야 되는 거 아니에요?
While much of the discussion focused on long-term reform, Lee also stressed the need for swift execution of the government's supplementary budget once it passes parliament. The more than $17 billion package is aimed at cushioning the economy from the energy and inflation shock caused by the war. The National Assembly is set to begin reviewing the government's extra budget bill on Tuesday, with the aim of passing it at a plenary session later this week. 송유진, Arirang News.
The second day of government questioning sessions at the National Assembly took place on Monday, focusing on the economy and the government's proposed supplementary budget to support people's livelihoods. Our political correspondent An Sung-jin has the details.
Fierce political battles continued through the second day of government questioning sessions, which this time focused on the economy, especially the Middle East's impact on it. The National Assembly convened a plenary session on Monday with government officials, including Prime Minister Kim Min-seok and Finance Minister Koo Yoon-chul present. As anticipated, lawmakers from the ruling and opposition parties clashed over the government's proposed supplementary budget, drafted in response to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. The plan proposes spending around 26.2 trillion Korean won, or $17.4 billion to alleviate the impact on the public, SMEs, and businesses in general. The ruling Democratic Party continued to stress its efforts on examining broader measures tied to energy security and the economy by expanding shipping routes, including passage to the Red Sea and diversifying supply sources and regions.
The Middle East situation accelerated a transition toward renewable energy to reduce structural reliance on fossil fuels. We look to expand the diversity of energy types and supply chains to better withstand external shocks.
The main opposition People Power Party argued that key components of the budget proposal, such as subsidies to offset high energy prices and funding for renewable energy projects, are mere cash handouts for electoral purposes.
There are growing concerns that with liquidity already on the rise, pushing through an additional supplementary budget could further expand money supply and put pressure on the exchange rate.
Rising energy costs, prolonged supply chain instability, and the development of chip clusters were also discussed during the session, with lawmakers pressing the government to detail its contingency measures. The supplementary budget will be further scrutinized by the Parliamentary Budget Committee over the next 2 days, with debate expected to continue to the next plenary session this Friday. In the meantime, the National Assembly will hold its last questioning session on social issues next Monday. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
Seoul will impose a 5-day vehicle rotation at public parking lots after raising its energy security alert to caution amid the prolonged Middle East conflict. Starting tomorrow, the measure applies to 75 facilities and covers passengers' cars with 10 seats or fewer, with weekday entry based on the last digit on the vehicle's license plate. Weekends and holidays are exempt. 33 locations in traditional markets, commercial areas, and dense neighborhoods are excluded to limit disruption. Exemptions also cover vehicles for people with disabilities, national merit recipients, pregnant women, and energy in emergency use. Electric and hydrogen cars are allowed, while compact and hybrid vehicles remain subject to the rule.
Good morning, I'm Chu Ji-hyun, and this is the world now. Russian drones struck Ukraine's Black Sea port city of Odesa overnight on Monday, killing a 30-year-old mother, her 2-year-old daughter, and one other woman. Residential buildings, energy infrastructure, and a kindergarten were damaged in the attack. Odesa's regional governor said 16 people sustained injuries, including a pregnant woman and 2 small children. Around 16,700 households across several districts lost power, with the energy company saying repairs would take significant time. President Vladimir Zelensky said Russia launched 140 drones at Ukraine in overnight attacks, also striking energy infrastructure across the Chernihiv, Sumy, Kharkiv, and Dnipro regions. Over the past week alone, Russia has attacked Ukraine with more than 2,800 attack drones, nearly 1,350 guided aerial bombs, and over 40 missiles. Zelensky renewed his call for additional air defense systems, saying Russia has no intention of stopping. The U.S. Supreme Court on Monday handed Trump's former advisor Steve Bannon a significant legal victory, issuing an order that opens the door to the dismissal of his criminal contempt of Congress conviction. The justices set aside an appeals court decision that had kept Bannon's 2022 conviction intact. With that appeal ruling now thrown out, a federal trial judge can proceed with the Trump administration's pending request to drop the case entirely. Bannon has already completed a 4-month prison term following his conviction for defying a subpoena from the House committee that investigated the January 6, 2021 Capitol attack. The Justice Department, which pursued the case under the Biden administration, abandoned its defense of the conviction after Trump took office for a second term. The head of the International Monetary Fund said on Monday that the war in the Middle East is set to push inflation higher and slow global growth, warning that even a swift end to hostilities will not prevent a downgrade to the IMF's economic outlook. IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva said the conflict has reduced global oil supply by 13%, disrupting energy shipments and supply chains from helium to fertilizers. She said the deeper and longer the war runs, the greater the damage to growth and prices worldwide. The IMF releases its full World Economic Outlook on April 14th, where the war is expected to dominate discussions among global finance officials. NASA's Artemis II crew set a new human spaceflight distance record on Monday, traveling 252,755 miles from Earth. They traveled further from Earth than the previous record set by Apollo 13 almost 56 years ago. Astronauts Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Canadian Jeremy Hansen spent their 6th day in space on approach to the moon's far side, a region only Apollo crews who completed the full lunar orbit have ever seen directly. The crew proposed names for previously unnamed lunar craters, including one honoring mission commander Wiseman's late wife, Carol. During a 6-hour flyby, the astronauts photographed the far side of the moon.
Well, I had to take out my winter jacket again this morning. There was a sudden drop in temperatures overnight. Most regions saw morning lows going down 5 to 10 degrees Celsius in just a day, with a cold wave advisory even issued in parts of Gangwon-do province. The cold wind is making it feel even chillier, so hope you're dressed warmly. This chilly pattern will stick around through this week, with temperatures hovering below season norms. So please brace for dramatic swings in temperatures this week. And this afternoon, Seoul will only make it to 13 degrees Celsius. Daegu, Gyeongju, Busan, Jeju will make it to 14 degrees under sunny skies nationwide with clean air quality. Then rain is expected nationwide between Thursday and Friday, with heavier rain expected in Jeju and the south coast.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.